Okay, so chapter 7. So we've been talking about this idea that
Your mama.
there are two perspectives. There's God's perspective, and then there's our perspective.
You can't get it unless I do it. Okay, how do you like that?
Our perspective is that we feel ourselves, we feel our existence, and we know that God exists, but we don't understand God's existence. And because we don't understand God's existence, we refer to God as the nothing, the ayin, the great nothing, so to speak, the nothing that we can understand. And we refer to ourselves as an existence, as a yesh. We exist. On the other hand, from God's perspective, and this is the ultimate truth, is that really there's nothing outside of God. And nothing has any true existence outside besides for God, because everything else, any existence that is our reality is kept in existence by God at all times, whereas God's existence is not dependent on anything else. So they are qualitatively diametric opposites. You cannot compare God's existence to anything within our framework of reality. So considering all that, we said that we now understand, hang on just a second. We now understand the concept of mitzvot. And we now understand the concept, in other words, basically mitzvot create this relationship between the infinite and ourselves, and we are given access in a way that we can't yet perceive, but we are given access to the infinite even within our finite world. And now what we're going to see is that miracles are similar to that same experience, that just like when we do a mitzvah, we are able to reveal that godliness in the world, and we are not yet able to perceive it, but when Mashiach comes, all of nature will be uplifted, all of the existence will be uplifted because of everything that we did. The same thing with regards to miracles, and that's going to lead immediately back to the concept of challenges. And this is very, very apropos for right now because of the timing of the next today and tomorrow and in fact the next week. So let's go from there. Hang on a second. All right. So miracles do quite the same. They reveal the ultimate source of creation within nature, with nature itself. Excuse me. The word for nature, teva, has the same numerical value as the divine name Elohim. And this is because nature stems from this divine source. So we're going to talk about the differences between the name Elohim and the name Havaya in the next mimer. We're going to talk about them more extensively. But in general, Havaya, Yudke Vavke, the name Yudke Vavke, is the ultimate source for creation, was, is, and will be in one unit, as we explained. And so that's beyond, as God is beyond nature, but relative to nature. Elohim, on the other hand, is the limitation. It's the source of limitation and the source of finite existence, and that comes, of course, from the word Elohim. Both comes the word Aleph Lamed, which means power. The word Alim, of course, in modern Hebrew means violent, and because the word Aleph Lamed comes from the term power. You see the word sometimes Elohim is used to describe judges or people in power, even throughout Tanakh. And not only that, Elohim, of course, is also plural. So Elohim means powers. So you see that the name Elohim has to do with multiplicity, has to do with more than one, so to speak. Obviously, when we're talking about Elohim as God, there's only one. But when we're understanding God as he relates to the world, so then there's God as he relates to different things in different ways. And that's the reason why Elohim has this plural form to it. So nature, and the word Elohim is also the same gematria, the same numerical equivalent as hateva, as nature. And the idea is that this that the source of nature comes from the divine name Elohim. So getting back to the idea of miracles, which of course the idea of a miracle is the breakage of nature, the spiritual ramification of a miracle is expressed as how nature is lifted up and incorporated into the divine name Havaya. So when a miracle happens, what we've been explaining is that the godliness that is everywhere and is only evident when we think about it and we think how the systems work and we think why they work and how they work so seamlessly or seemingly seamlessly together and all that kind of thing. When a miracle happens, that divine source is revealed. So the nature as it was is now lifted up and revealed to be what it truly is, which is godly. So to return to our opening verse, you have given those who fear you a miracle. And this time we're translating the word nes as a miracle. So that nature itself will be uplifted for the sake of the truth. Nes lihitnoses is the idea that a miracle is for the purpose of litnoses. That which the miracle is happening is now being uplifted. Why is that done? For the sake of the ultimate truth, so that we can perceive godliness. The purpose of the miracle is for the ultimate truth to be drawn into nature itself, so that nature itself will express, should be expressing God's ultimate existence and total dominion. And the end result is miracles on extension into this world directly from the essence of God. So the essence of God basically goes beyond all of existence, and beyond, as God is above nature, as God is within nature, and basically enters into and reveals the master behind the curtain, so to speak. So that's the idea that miracles uplift nature. Miracles are not just that which uplift us, but even nature itself is changed so that we have a different appreciation. So again, getting back to my story, not to go, go too deeply into that, but basically, my appreciation and our appreciation of life itself and of health and of the workings of the inner body and all that kind of thing are completely different as a result of the experience that we had. We can no longer say things, just in a haphazard way. You have a much greater appreciation for everything as a result of what we saw, of what we experienced. So how does that relate to challenges? So chapter 8 is going to be focusing on the words yirecha, natata lirecha, that God gives to those who fear you a miracle. And the idea, or the reason why there's a specific focus on those who fear you, is because of the fact that this was said on the date of the 12th of Tammuz. The 12th of Tammuz was the previous Rebbe's birthday, but not only was it his birthday, it was also the day in which he was freed from communist exile. Of course, going back to 1927, there's a smack in the middle of the communist purges, and the previous Rebbe was absolutely a rebel to the communist cause. He was pushing schools. He was sending his students out to create schools and to build mikvahs and all that kind of thing, while the Yevsektia, which was the Jewish section, was working very, very hard to close all these things down. And so they were infuriated by what happened. They obviously got him to be arrested. His original decree was to be put to death, and we have the KGB documents from the time as well. He was originally supposed to be put to death. There was a massive uproar. Hasidim pushed throughout the world in order to be able to get pressure on the Russians to be able to let him go. And eventually it was changed to 10 years in Siberia, which was also a death sentence. 10 years in Siberia was changed several days later to 3 years in exile, which was also certainly not ideal in any way whatsoever. And miraculously, on the 12th of Tammuz, he was told, oh, by the way, tomorrow you're being freed. So that was a quite an incredible especially if anybody knows the history of the times, this was quite a remarkable occurrence. This week, tomorrow or today is the 7th. So this coming week is the 10th of Kislev, which is the day in which the second Chabad Rebbe was freed from prison. He was arrested under false charges of spurring a revolution. In his case, actually, it was a distant cousin of his who was trying to extort money from him. And, he told his cousin that basically has no interest whatsoever in playing those games. His cousin said, "You're going to regret it." And he informed the government that the Mittel Rebbe, Rabbi Dov Ber, is trying to foment a revolution and whatnot. And that was obviously serious charges. He was arrested and he was freed on the 10th of Kislev. On the 19th of Kislev, which is the week after that, is the day in which the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, and of course the author of the Tanya, he was freed from his first imprisonment. And then a week later is when he was freed from his second imprisonment. So he also, I like to joke about the fact that Chabad has a lot of ghetto credibility because of all these arrests and imprisonments. But the Alter Rebbe was arrested under charges that he was also he was giving money to the Turkish government, which of course was in a direct enemy of the Tsarist government of the time. He, of course, was giving money to the tzedakah that he had, the charity that he had set up for the Jews who were living in Israel at the time, and that's the reason why money was being sent there. But he was accused of sending it to the Turkish government, and he was also accused of anti-Tsarist activities because of his writings and things like that. And again, there were fellow Jews who were enemies of his because they were against the Chabad movement, and they informed on him both times. So right now is really times when we're talking about these people and these kind of challenges that the great people of both our generations and previous generations had, that they face these kinds of challenges. And the question that's often asked is basically, okay, why do they need to go through these things? And we don't have an ultimate answer why anybody needs to go through a challenge. But what we're going to see here is that the purpose of the challenge is the same as the purpose of the miracle. It's for us to reveal something that's behind everything. And the difference between the two is this is very profound. The difference between the two is that in a miracle, God reaches down and says, "Oh, by the way, here I am." In a miracle, we reach up. In a challenge, when we're going through a personal challenge, the purpose is for us to reach up and say, "Here God is." So the two of them are really reflections on each other. And that's, again, the ultimate reason why the word nes is the same as nisayon. Because both of them have the same essential purpose to reveal God's existence in the world and to recognize that there's truly nothing besides for God, and that anything that we see is just a facade over godliness. Of the two of them, which one's greater? A challenge is. A challenge is greater because of the fact that it has to come from us. And that's why God created the world the way he did. And then the reason why he doesn't do miracles nearly as much is because God didn't create the world for miracles. God created the world for it to be a very finite, limited system, and for us to work within it. But when we go and we reveal that which is behind the facade, that's the ultimate purpose of it all. So let's look at it inside. So herein lies the connection between miracles and a spiritual test or challenge. A spiritual test is such that in reality, it has no true existence. its whole purpose is encapsulated in the fact that the one going through the experience should not be affected by it. This is a very, very, very interesting statement. And honestly, if our therapists would tell us this, you might want to tell your therapist to go jump off a cliff, because something like this can only really be said by somebody who understands. And the fact that the Rebbe went through the things that he went through allows him to be able to say this. The fact of the matter is he was born in 1902, and from what I've read in the history books, those were some pretty intense formative years, going through the pogroms of the early 1900s, leading into World War I and everything going on in World War I. His mother basically ran a refugee organization for tens of thousands of people came into their city. And from personal testimony, we have, oftentimes he and his brothers actually slept other places on the floor in order to be able to bring refugees into the house. The Russian Revolution and all of that upheaval, and moving from there, he lived in Berlin in 1930s, and then in Vichy, France, and finally got out of Russia after that, and then comes to the United States. His father was killed by the communists. His grandparents were killed by the Nazis. His brother was killed by the Nazis. His father-in-law was obviously tortured by the communists to the point where he was very sick at the end of his life as a result of the things that he went through and the imprisonment that we spoke about before. So he saw and he experienced some of the things that are really, really the most difficult things to experience. His brothers, he had two brothers. One was killed by the Nazis. The other one died very young. All these things that for people are crushing and real serious challenges. And his perspective was not one of being focused on all the problems. His perspective was the exact opposite. There's a fantastic book out there called Positivity Bias, which goes through the Rebbe's perspective on this, of always seeing the positive, despite a very, very difficult and intense life. So this idea that a challenge doesn't exist is a remarkable one. That it's all in the mind, and that if you look at your challenges as something holding you back, you're already missing the point. But if you look at the challenge as something that you need to get through, and you don't focus on the fact that it's a challenge, that's how you get through it. The Medrash tells an amazing story about Avraham Avinu, which of course we said the whole idea of kosht, truth, reflects on him. The Medrash says that when he was heading to the Mount Moriah to sacrifice his son, he was faced by several obstacles. And one of these obstacles was a river. And there was no way to be able to get around it. So he walked straight into the river, and he got up to his neck, and he felt it pulling him away. And he said, God, I'm trying to go where you're telling me to go. And the river disappeared. And Medrash says that it was the Satan, the angel of distraction, so to speak. The word Satan means to push aside, who was trying to prevent him from getting to his destination. So the fact that it was a mirage, it didn't feel like a mirage when he was going through it, when he first saw the river. It didn't feel like a mirage when he walked into it and was all wet, was starting to get pulled away. But there's this idea that it completely disappeared afterwards. And he was able to see what it was in its reality. It was just meant to be a distraction. And so that idea is really incredible. And that's reflected in this concept that the whole purpose of the challenge is that the person going through the experience should not be affected by it, and that it itself has no existence to itself. So the Rebbe continues this, and he says, Rebbes and other such righteous people who have already accomplished everything needed regarding self-refinement do not need challenges for themselves. In other words, all of us, when we go through difficult things in order to be able to become better. Of course, I'm wearing uniform today because I'm going to speak to a school about Veterans Day. And those of us who've been in the military understand that there's basic training. I went through officer training school. It's not quite the same thing as basic training, but it's intense in and of itself. But the purpose of basic training is not to destroy the soldier completely. It's to put the soldier through the experience to the point that they no longer are inhibited by their own limitations. They no longer see their limitations the same way. Prior to basic training, there's a certain attitude in life. And then after basic training, there's a recognition that, if I really wanted to, if I really had to push myself, I really could get through this. But people on this, intense spiritual level of Rebbes and the tzaddikim, the righteous people of every generation, people like Avraham Avinu, they've already gone through the process of self-refinement. They already live a godly life. They already are behaving in a way in which their behavior is completely aligned with godliness. And so they don't need the challenges for themselves. And the Rebbe continues, on a personal level, they don't suffer from concealment of godliness. But the people of their generation do. As these spiritual giants grow from level to level, they uplift their generation along with. But the challenges they have are such that they utterly obliterate them. They draw the energy of Soviet from its place above and beyond nature, down into nature itself, in such a way that everyone can see the miracle, even non-Jews, and even their own opponents and enemies, and thereby recognize the ultimate truth, the truth of God in the world. And that's exactly what happened. Of course, he's describing the previous Rebbe's experience going into prison. And if you haven't read the previous Rebbe's diary of that experience, I highly, highly recommend it, not just from a spiritual perspective, but purely from a literary experience. The previous Rebbe was an unbelievably descriptive writer. His writings are just beautiful, very, very, very beautiful Yiddish in the original, and the translators did a phenomenal job. You can find it on Chabad.org, or if you want to see everything, including some of the background information and and some of the KGB files and all that kind of thing, there's a book called The Heroic Struggle. I don't know if it's available anymore, but it's a phenomenal, phenomenal book. But if you go on Chabad.org and you search for the arrest and imprisonment of Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, you'll find the entire diary, and that diary is absolutely, absolutely phenomenal. It's an unbelievable read. And his attitude in prison was such that he was simply not cowed by anything they had to say. And he gave it to them. He really, really gave it to them. It's quite remarkable. This story that I'm about to tell you did not actually happen in this final imprisonment. It happened when he was younger. He was arrested because there was a question as to whether the boys in the yeshiva were evading the draft. And so he was arrested and pulled into a room where there was a long conference room table, and there were revolvers in front of every single seat. And I don't know how many people, 10 or 15 people sitting around the table. And he was seated at the edge of the table. It's just a remarkable scene. You think about it, basically, here's come into a room. It's like something straight out of a movie. And everybody's got a gun in front of them. And the previous Rebbe was he was completely nonplussed about this. And eventually, one of the interrogators was getting so frustrated, he picked up his gun and he said, "This toy has caused many people to speak." And the previous Rebbe, without batting an eyelash, said the following. He said, "That toy causes people to speak, those who have many gods and one world. But I have more than one world and only one God, and that toy simply doesn't impress me." And the guy was so shocked by that comment, he just put it back down. And so this is when we talk about obliterating the challenges. It's one thing to go through these soul-crushing experiences and come out on the other side. But it's absolutely incredible to show the entire world that basically you do not exist. And to tell the communists, the entire Soviet government, all the way up to the top, you do not exist. And whatever you do to me, that doesn't change the fact that my job and who I am is Judaism and my relationship with God, and nothing else matters at all. And it really is remarkable. In our generation, again, another day that we just celebrated was the first day of Kislev, which is the day in which the Rebbe left 770 after having a major heart attack in 1977. The incredible thing about this was that he had actually 2 heart attacks over Shmini Atzeret and the following night, and the cardiologist described it when you're talking about heart attacks. This was a 10 on the scale of 10, and despite that, the Rebbe wanted to address the Hasidim immediately after Chag, and so he, if you want to put it, bullied the doctors into allowing him to speak, and they said, okay, only for 5 minutes. He spoke for a full half hour, and this is immediately after a heart attack, and you hear the Rebbe speak, because we have the recording of this, and it's remarkable hearing it, because you hear, of course, how weak the Rebbe is. You can hear the medication in his voice, and there is the message that the Chassidim receive is that nothing can stop the Rebbe from accomplishing what he needs to accomplish, and that's something that we take home, and that's something that we take to ourselves. And if people want to understand the secret to Chabad, that is one of the critical secrets. There's nothing like that in terms of ultimate leadership, being the standing up when you're incredibly sick and basically saying, it doesn't make a difference. I might be very sick, but I have something I need to accomplish, and nothing's going to stop me from accomplishing that. I need to continue doing what I need to do. That's an incredible feat. So we will finish this tomorrow. And because we're just finishing things off, God willing, we will also I should say, I'm not quite sure if we will be able to start the next mimer, which has to do with Hanukkah, which I'm very excited about, and I think you guys will find it very interesting. I don't see Rabbi Smith on, so if anybody has any questions, we can go from there.
Rabbi, about the numerical values of the different words, how come, what is that all about, the numerical values? Why are they so important?
It's an excellent question, and I don't have a phenomenal answer to you. I can give you the conceptual answer, but I'm not fully familiar with the entire...
I'll look it up, Rabbi. It's okay. Just was very curious that you mentioned all that.
I can give one reason. I think that Hebrew is the only language that the letters have numerical value.
Yes.
That gives meaning to the word.
Oh, I
correct.
Wow.
So there's an idea that and again, I'm saying the concept because I have questions on it that I don't have answers to it, but just to give you the concept is that there are levels of relationships. And, the first level of relationships is that when 2 words have the same meaning, that's obviously a very simple relationship. Homonyms are another relationship where 2 words are spelled the same and they therefore have some kind of interrelationship because of that. And then a deeper...
The same thing happens in Hebrew then. The same thing happens in Hebrew as in English.
But this is only in Hebrew. And when we're talking about the spiritual relationship between things, it's only in Hebrew. So gematria is certain words having certain numbers, relating to other numbers, also have that kind of internal relationship. But obviously, if you take that to the end of time, you can make all sorts of crazy results. So this is a study in and of itself, which words are related to other words and why. And you have to have sources for yourself. You can't just start making up gematrias and that kind of thing.
Of course.
The study of that, right? I'm not something I'm terribly familiar with, but in Kabbalah in general, there's oftentimes allusion to that. They'll break through something and say, okay, these things are similar because they have the same gematria, and that alludes to a deeper relationship between the two of them. Rabbi Smith, good to see you. Thank you, everybody. And,
Thank you, Rabbi.
I was in, Rabbi. Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Rabbi.